I found this a good movie to pass your time, but not by any chance of any historical value. The portrayal of Cleopatra reminded me of a cheap soap opera. The twist of the facts is funny. She gave birth while feeding her people. Oh please. A pregnant queen of Egypt, especially this one, would not bother going from one room to the other for that reason. They tried to make her appear a saint for God's sake. And the way they tried to justify her murdering her own sister, beyond description. Cleopatra was the greatest politician of her time. Her decisions were based on anything but her feelings and morals. She did everything for only two reasons: power and self-preservation. She was born in a family where she had to struggle for survival, something she did very well. Anything that stood in her way was either murdered, her brothers and sister, or seduced, Caesar and Mark Antony. Unfortunately, Octavian was too powerful to kill and too gay to be seduced. So, he was at her end. Based on the novel The Memoirs of Cleopatra by Margaret George, this miniseries is an okay adaptation of a truly fascinating piece of literature. I think that giving a fairer portrayal of Cleopatra is important, though Leonore Varela isn't that good an actress. I found her acting so amateurish next to that of Timothy Dalton and Billy Zane. At least she was better than Cassandra Voyages was as Arsinoe. Also, she made Cleopatra seem very childish and whiny at times, which was annoying. Otherwise, I liked this story. Timothy Dalton as Julius Caesar was fine in the role, though too dark and good-looking. Someone tell Daniel Craig please play Caesar sometime in his career. And Billy Zane did a good job as Mark Antony. The sets lived up to what Alexandria probably looked like, except there was little sign of the Greek influence on the city. The costumes were lovely and the supporting cast were some of the best, though I could have changed some of their lines for them, and I was able to overlook historical inaccuracies, such as Arsinoe being murdered in the dungeons of the Palace of Alexandria under Cleopatra's orders. Arsinoe appeared as a prisoner in Caesar's triumph, and since the public showed sympathy for her, Caesar allowed her to be released. They also didn't explain at the end that Caesarion was executed under Octavian's orders, but I guess they wanted to leave the audience with a bit of hope. Fine to watch on a wet or snowy afternoon. Dalton was surprisingly good as Caesar, as was Zane as Mark Antony. Ms. Varela, however, gave a most unfocused reading of Cleopatra, varying from passion to cruelty to vapidity but with no established core. In an effort such as this, that proved a cruel disappointment. Sets were gorgeous, as were the costumes. One could wish that Hollywood might approximate historically accurate women's clothing more closely, though. This was a visually rich spectacle. The story was fine. But some really effective bits. Cleopatra with attendance in final tableau really rang enormous bells for those familiar with the Taylor-Burton version. Not my top Cleopatra, nor my second to the top. Colbert is very good but definitely on the list. And, indeed, the DVD transfer is gorgeous. What can I say? I love watching these Egyptian movies. Although this Cleopatra did not surpass the one made in 1963 with Elizabeth Taylor, it is well worth seeing. The acting is very good, especially Billy Zane. The thing I like better about this movie than the old one is that it focuses a lot more on Cleopatra's son, Ptolemy Caesar, also known as Caesarion. The old one said nothing about Octavian trying to kill Caesarion. There are some very, how should I put this, revealing scenes in it. If you know what I mean. The antagonist, Octavian, makes a wonderful villain and you just can't help but hate him. The special effects in the movie sometimes go unnoticed, but they are very good as well. There are a few scenes where someone is beheaded that are very good. The movie is not very gory, but there is a lot of fighting. The ending, as in the old one, leaves you hanging. If someone knows what happens to Cleopatra's son, please tell me. I hope this movie is available to buy sometime soon, because I will definitely add it to my collection. This Halmy extravaganza actually has a very promising start with a terrific entrance by Timothy Dalton as Caesar, followed up by a memorable first meeting between him and lovely Leonore Varela as Cleo. Unfortunately, it soon goes downhill from there, and by the time Cleopatra has consolidated her hold on Egypt, we're getting dialogue like, "Caesar, I'm sorry about your library." Cleo, sighing like she's just scratched off a losing $1 lottery ticket, half of it is gone, half the world's knowledge. However, if you enjoy cheesy movies with beautiful people declaiming and narrowing their eyes at each other, You could do a lot worse than Billy Zane and Timothy Dalton, who are very much into it, and who both look breathtakingly manly draped in togas and other bedsheets. Dalton in particular looks amazingly fit and sexy for a 53-year-old, and it's hard to imagine another actor working today who could be a more commanding Caesar. Unfortunately, Varela's acting is just terrible and, well, the script is just hopeless. It gets slightly better when the plot goes from Egypt to Rome, where everyone speaks in English accents. But none of the acting in this is exactly Oscar caliber, shall we say. Take it for what it is and dig for the guilty pleasures. Cleopatra is one of the most fascinating figures from history. This 1999 TV movie does a good job of telling her story from her point of view. Granted, Leonore Varela is a bit off, but she's not bad and the movie moves very well. It's hard to believe it's almost 3 hours, it's time that never feels wasted. The story of Egypt's last great queen and her Roman lovers Julius Caesar and Mark Antony have been told before, most notably in 63 with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. This film is close to that and in some ways better. Billy Zane is terrific here, he plays Antony better than Burton. Zane remembers Antony was a soldier who was prodded into lofty ambition by Cleopatra, even pitting Roman against Roman and splitting an empire. In his heart he must have known he couldn't succeed. Zane never lets you forget that, and his performance should have been honored. Timothy Dalton is a good Caesar too. He plays the conqueror full on, ambitious and powerful, but not a monster or a hero, just a man who wanted glory for Rome. His assassination is well handled here. Rupert Graves is a slimy Octavian, Augustus, and as well as the villain. The look of the film is pretty good, though at times it feels like a filmed play. The music is unmoving, but the FX shots are tolerable. The Battle of Actium is brief but accurate. Antony always rushed in like a bull. For a TV move they managed to be sexy and violent, two things necessary to tell Cleo's story. The birth of Caesarion is realistic. The only real downer here is I think this movie was made, or at least planned before the discovery of records found in the sea that told of Antony and Cleo's great love and of the fact they did have children. At least 4, including a set of twins. It is also possible that a girl was saved from Octavian's butchery. The rest did not make it, including, probably Caesarion. Unfortunately we don't see that here in the end, though well played, is just like earlier versions. Still, this is historical fiction at its best. Well done. I tried watching the 1963 version of Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor a few years ago and gave up after about 90 adventure-less minutes of boring dialogue. The 1999 version makes up for this shortcoming as it combines action and adventure with the expected melodrama. A few memorable highlights are as follows. Timothy Dalton is outstanding as Julius Caesar and has an undeniable commanding presence. That distinguishing cleft chin of his somehow fits the role just perfectly. Billy Zane is also great as Mark Antony. He played the psycho killer in Dead Calm, and the love-to-hate villain in Titanic, but his character in Cleopatra is the express opposite. As Mark Antony, Zane is both likable and heroic, not to mention loyal and realistically human. There are some great Moroccan locations for the outdoor scenes. The indoor and city sets are good and have that distinctive Egyptian vibe, the costuming as well. The multifaceted score isn't overly bombastic, but it is fitting, properly edited and memorable. As for Leonore Varela, the actress who plays Cleopatra, she has the requisite exotic looks for the part, but she's too bland. She's undeniably good looking, but she's not my cup of tea, too thin, so all that leaves, for me, is her performance, which is merely adequate. However, I'll say this, she's more fitting for the role than Elizabeth Taylor. The 63 version failed to pull me into its story. This 99 version pulls you right in and is easy to follow. I'm not saying that it's the most captivating piece of cinema, but it's certainly better than the 63 rendition. Warning. The runtime of the film is 177 minutes and the DVD 155 minutes, but the VHS version runs only 139 minutes, cutting 38 minutes from the original. Grade: C+ or B.